And so I'm completely delighted to be able to welcome Erin Hamlin to Colorado. I've known Erin for about 5 years. I've served for several years on the board of the Center for Election Science, which is a wonderful organization that Erin co-founded in 2011. He became the executive director and is responsible for tremendous growth in its resources and impact over the last couple of years. I mean, tremendous growth, speaking as a board member. It's now a multi-million-dollar organization and helped get Fargo, North Dakota on the map as the first city in the US to adopt approval voting. Now working with a variety of organizations around the country, and even in British Columbia, where board member Jameson Quinn of Harvard was instrumental in their recent referendum on 3 proportional voting methods. So I'm excited to see CES here in Colorado, where we have other things going on, and hope to get you working with the League here and elsewhere. Beyond Erin's expertise in election methods, he's an attorney and a social scientist. Please help me welcome Erin Hamlin, speaking on what is proportional representation, how can you get PR in your local elections.
Thanks, Bill. And also just like as a quick thing for the league, I've traveled a lot in terms of like where I've lived over the years, mostly for school, jumping from different graduate programs, and I've always been able to rely on the league to figure out who I should vote for. So thanks for helping me make my homework as a citizen a lot easier. I really appreciate that. This is actually the first presentation I will have been given for multi-winner methods. So multi-winner methods are really exciting. They can be a little bit more complicated, so the fact that you all asked for this, like, I'm excited. So let's go ahead and get things started. So we can maybe use single winner methods as a segue here. So there are some places where you just have to use a single winner method. You've got some kind of executive office. You can't use a multi-winner method for mayor or governor or president. Like, sometimes you just need to use a single winner method. But you have these other situations, like say like you've got a council or some kind of legislative body. In those cases, you've got some options now. In the US, we tend to take things and these legislative bodies and divide them up into these single member districts. And you get this really tight geographic representation, but you miss out on some other stuff. And when you have these single member districts, you create some vulnerabilities, some things that are just inherent to that. One is gerrymandering. So we all know what gerrymandering is. Gerrymandering is when whoever happens to be in power at the time, whatever political party, they get the pleasure of drawing the lines and selecting who their voters are, and they manipulate it so that they can maximize the number of people who are going to vote for, that are going to be able to get them seats in the legislature. And the reason gerrymandering is bad is because it creates a disproportional outcome. So it allows one group who happens to have power at the time, it allows them to go and get way more seats than they deserve. So like that's why gerrymandering is bad. Now there are some different ideas in terms of, okay, well, we recognize that this is a bad thing to have people in power choosing who their voters are. What do we do about that? Some different ideas are we could have independent commissions. Maybe we have some kind of piece of software, draw the lines in some objective way that has nothing to do with partisanship. But interestingly, it seems like there's something inherent with doing these single member districts and getting these outcomes where some group disproportionately benefits. Now, if you do gerrymandering in and of itself, like you're going to exasperate that to like a further degree, but even when you take these other approaches like independent commissions, or you have a computer draw lines, so you still get what are called false majorities. False majorities is when you have some group and say they get fewer than half of the votes, yet they get more than half of the seats, or vice versa. And we can see that's just not fair. If you got more than half of the seats, well, you should have gotten more than half of the votes. We don't like to see that lopsided. And interestingly, with independent commissions, you can look at the last couple of elections that Canada has had. And Canada has used independent commissions since 1964. And the older election that was more recent, conservatives got the benefit of a false majority. And then Trudeau started talking a lot about proportional representation, but then he quieted down after the Liberals got the benefit of a false majority. And again, like Canada, they use independent commissions. They've been doing it since 1964. If anyone should know how to do it, it's probably them, and it's not working. So we see, so in the literature, when we look at scholars like David Farrell and Douglas Amy, they estimate that these false majorities within single-member frameworks appear just over about 40% of the time. But when you use a different type of multi-winner method called proportional methods that we'll get into shortly, you see that dip like around 10% of the time. So it can still happen, but these numbers are very different, 40-something versus about 10. That's a big difference. So some of these kind of like knee-jerk reactions for what we should do to avoid gerrymandering, like these don't seem to be very effective solutions. And some other disadvantages with single member districts. You see that I'm not a big fan of single member districts when you don't have to do them. So if you vote for somebody and you didn't get that person elected, well then you don't get any representation. So that was your shot and you missed out on it. Whereas with multi-member districts, particularly with proportional methods, you at least have a much greater shot at having your vote towards actually electing someone. So you get geographic representation, but oh, the price you pay. And then there are all kinds of different single winner voting methods that are not going to be part of this presentation, because that's a whole animal unto itself. So there are a bunch of different types of multi-winner methods. So we're going to be talking about them in 3 classes. So there's like a block class, which tends to have have outcomes where a lot of these candidates who win look alike. There's going to be semi-proportional methods that use kind of a simple yet sloppy calculation process to get an outcome that's somewhat proportional, and then you get proportional methods where the calculation is a little bit more complicated, but you get a lot of proportionality, which is the outcome that we're shooting for. So starting off with block methods. So here, probably the way that you're most used to seeing this is with, say like you're electing a council, and say you've got 7 people on your council. You're looking at your ballot, and it'll tell you to choose as many candidates as there are seats to be filled. So there are 7 people on the council. Say there are like 20 candidates there. The ballot tells you to choose no more than 7. So that's an example of a block method that you see pretty common throughout the US. And you can actually take other single winner voting methods and make them block methods as well. So it's not just this normal plurality voting that can be a block method. We can do this with other methods as well. But a common feature that they have is that the outcomes tend to be pretty homogeneous. So like particularly with the block version of plurality voting, when you say choose as many people as there are seats to be filled, you can have some majority block where if they are able to control the majority of the votes, they can control all the seats on the council. So like, say some group makes up 60% of the electorate, that group, so long as they have a coordinated vote, can pick and select all 7 of those seats and control that entire council. And that 40%, like they just get nothing. With some other voting methods, like you may see a kind of a homogeneous block, but it may be more geared around the center, potentially. But in any case, like you don't see a lot of diversity with these outcomes. And this is what one of those ballots would look like. So it just says choose as many people as there are as there are seats to be filled. This is from Behind the Ballot Box, one of Douglas Amy's many books. So that was block methods. Block methods are the easiest ones. So there you just add them up. And semi-proportional methods, there are a few different kinds here. There's single non-transferable vote, which is a pretty simple one. You just pick one candidate, even though there are more seats to be filled. There's limited vote, which is when you are allowed to choose fewer candidates as there are seats to be filled. So like say there are 5 seats to be filled, they would say something like choose 3 or fewer or something like that. Then there's cumulative voting when you can stack your votes. And we'll look at examples of these in a moment. So one of the things that's nice about these semi-proportional methods is they give you a roughly proportional outcome. And they're simple, but kind of sloppy as well. So these particular methods, they rely on a lot of coordination with the people running. So like say you are part of a party for some group, and that political party, you see, like you're looking at your electorate, you see how much support you have, and you see that you could really gather up about 40% of the electorate. Now, if there are, say, 5 seats up for grabs, and you put out 4 candidates, well, that could be rough for you. Because really, if you only have 40% of the electorate, you should really only field 2 candidates. Any more than that, and you start splitting your vote. Also, say you field a candidate, and one of your candidates is super popular, well, that could push out your other candidates. So actually, you have to coordinate among your supporters as well to make sure that one of your candidates isn't too popular compared to one of the others. So you have a lot of coordination that you need to have with doing these semi-proportional methods. So while they're easy, you don't necessarily, like certain groups aren't necessarily able to get the representation that they deserve because you have to coordinate all of this. And it can be challenging coordinating an entire electorate for a party. So here's an example of limited voting. It just tells you to choose fewer candidates as there are seats to be filled. Like say there are 3 people elected here, it's saying choosing 2. So just limited voting is always choosing fewer people as there are seats to be filled. And then single non-transferable vote, kind of the extreme of that, where it says just choose 1. So it looks a lot like the kind of regular plurality voting balance that we're used to seeing. But with this one, it's electing multiple people at once. And these methods are really kind of relying on vote splitting between a particular block of voters. And that's how they get this kind of semi-proportional outcome. And then there's cumulative voting. So cumulative voting, say like there are 3 seats here, you get 3 votes or pips, like whatever word you prefer to use. And you can actually stack it on people. So say there's only 1 candidate you liked, you can put all 3 of your votes on that particular candidate. You put 2 on one, 1 on another. And of course, like if you're electing, say like 10 people in your council, you've got like 10 of these votes you can divide up and stack among candidates. All right, now we're getting into like proportional methods. So you talked about block methods, semi-proportional methods, and these are proportional methods. So proportional methods give us this more proportional result. So, and here, like when we're talking about proportionality, we mean that, like, say there's a particular group out there, and they have like 40% of the electorate support. They should get roughly 40% of the seats in representation. So that's the idea there. They shouldn't get too much more than they deserve, and they shouldn't get cut short of what they deserve. So when we're talking about proportionality, that specifically is what we mean. These proportional methods tend to be really good at delivering that. So on the downside, we've got some more math compared to some of the other methods. We're done with just adding. Fortunately, in some cases, it doesn't get too bad. It might ask you to multiply or something, so we're still not too far off the road. Let's go ahead and, oh, and with the, these, like, there are a couple ways to set this up with the proportional method, or these other ones as well. So you can say, like, you have some kind of legislative body. You can elect the entire legislative body at large, some kind of, like, imagine like the U.S. House, but it just represents the whole country and it's not divided into states. You can have it entirely at large, or you can imagine, say, California, if it wanted to apportion its U.S. House seats, it might like make it so that each district has 5 seats in it, and then just divide that up. So you'd still have some line drawing there, but even though there is line drawing, when you have seats of at least, district sizes of at least 5, it's really hard to gerrymander that. So it has a strong buffer against gerrymandering when you draw districts like that. So you can have a bunch of multi-member districts, or you can have one big old district with everybody in it. So here, this is the party list system. This is a system that's common in a lot of European countries. And this particular one tends to be used when you have a whole legislative body that you're electing at once. So like say, like whether it be like the US House or something, if we were to take all those people and have them all at large, or you can imagine in Colorado, they just went and had the whole Congress elected at large for the state legislature. Like this would be one option to do it. And here you get one vote that you get one vote, you choose a particular party, and say like 20% of people choose, say, the Reform Party. Reform Party will get roughly 20% of the seats. And then there's also an open and closed list version of party list systems. This particular one is an open list. And so it's kind of like having single non-transferable vote, like nested within this other system, because you can only choose one of the candidates within the options here. And it just keeps going through there. And so when you're picking a particular party, so with these proportional methods, the way that it achieves this proportional outcome, like the semi-proportional ones, you relied on this vote splitting stuff. But with the proportional ones that are more fully proportional, what you get is a lot of reweighting as you go along. And so the idea is you got something in an earlier round. So you got someone elected. You got your way at some point. Well, now you get your ballot de-weighted so that other people have an opportunity to have their say. And these calculations or algorithms that do that reweight these ballots in a way that achieves a proportional outcome. So say you chose a particular party, say you chose the Reform Party, and you got your candidate elected there. So the Reform Party had the most votes in a particular round, you got them elected. Well, now your ballot is reweighted. Some, like there's a Jefferson method that uses the 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, and just goes all the way through. There's a St. Legoux method, 1/3, 1/5, 1/7. So there are different ways of doing it. So like if you just got someone elected you got your first person elected, you get it reweighted by 1/2. Say you got someone else elected in the later round, now your ballot has 1/3 of its original weight, and it will keep doing that as you elect more people. And the weight of your ballot is tallied along with the rest of these ballots. And so it's doing this reweighting, and it gets a proportional outcome. And so there's also mixed member. So mixed member will have that party list type setup, but at the same time you get some local representation as well. And then there's like a third kind of chamber that fixes the disproportionality created by the single member districts. Germany uses a mixed member system. Oh, and I should have said this earlier, but like, this stuff is, if there's, you don't have to wait until the end for questions on this. I probably should have said that earlier, I apologize. So now we get some more fun stuff. So the last couple in our lineup are single transferable vote and sequential proportional approval voting. So single transferable vote, this is a ballot, an actual ballot from Cambridge, Massachusetts. So the way that this works is a lot like,
Yes.
yeah.
What size is the font in the actual hold your hand? And is that paper, what we're seeing there, an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper?
This is as big as I could make this.
In reality?
Oh, yeah.
But in reality,
Yeah.
I mean, what size font are we talking about?
I don't know the font size on
We need
this.
Celeste here because she has some actual familiarity with this. And she said they do give them rulers, now rulers to keep your columns straight.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
Not the most accessible scheme.
yeah, and this is one issue that comes up with both the instant runoff voting and here single transferable vote. And I will use different names for these as well. So I very much differentiate single winner systems and multi-winner systems. And with when you have a multi-winner system, say like you're electing, how many people is it electing, does it say? I can't remember. I think I looked up and I think there were like 7 or 9 people on Cambridge's council. But one thing to keep in mind, like say you've got 7 people that you're trying to elect, you're not going to get 7 candidates. You're going to get.
If you can hear me, it's 9 people for city council and 6 people for school board.
And
Yes.
What is the size of the ballot, Celeste? Type size.
You know, the font size for the ballot? We're getting super technical.
Or even just the size of the page, 8.5 by 11.
Is that good?
I think she's doing research.
Let us know if you get font sizes.
Yeah, so,
Besides myself, has anybody just looking at that ballot been overwhelmed by voter fatigue? Of just saying, how deep into the woods do I really want to go with this ballot? I mean, am I the only one that's stunned by it, or any of?
I'm just confused, because I thought with single transferable vote, this was all done behind the scenes. Does the actual voter have to do this?
oh yeah, this is,
Well,
so
no,
this
but
is
you
the
vote
easy
one-
part.
the 1 through
This is the
20
easy
vote.
part for single transferable vote.
And yes, the voter has to do it.
Yeah.
So it's much a problem of the ballot design as it is a problem of the method. So I mean, the ballot design makes it look a lot more confusing than it is. All you're choosing is like, you know, I want to choose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But you got this huge grid and you got to fill in little squares and so that's, I think, as much a problem as it is the method.
So other places besides Cambridge also use single transferable vote. They use it for one of the chambers in Australia as well. And one of the things that they find over there, and they provide lots of opportunity to rank all these many candidates. And they find that when you have a long list of candidates and you're asked to rank them, it's a pretty big cognitive burden. And most people do what's called above the line voting in Australia, where they just say, hey, I've only got so much mental energy I can put out there, and I'm just going to let the party figure out what these rankings are. And so they just basically delegate that to their favorite party to do the rankings for them. So And you can like think of just kind of the cognitive burden there. If you have a long list, even with something that you're familiar about, like say you have a list of like 30 movies that you've seen, it may not be difficult like to maybe like pick multiple of them, but like if you're asked to rank those 30 movies in order, like that's pretty hefty. But also like technically you don't need to rank everyone, but I mean you need that information too at the same time. So if the voters are willing to put information down, then like you're not going to get as good of a result because that information never went in. So.
Well, do you have to rank all 20 or whatever, or can you
No.
just, like, I like these three, and I'll just give them 1, 2, 3?
Yeah, you can do that, but you have to keep in mind that when a voting method can only work with the information that you provided. So if a voter is overwhelmed by the amount of information or the process they have to do to provide that information, then the voting method is looking at it as like, well, like I've got my calculation process that I do to achieve a result, but I can only do so much if this is the only information.
There's nobody voting for more than 3 candidates.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
Okay.
And so the way that single transferable vote works is that it has a particular threshold that a candidate needs to surpass in order to get elected. This is normally called the Droop formula, and there would be a fun slide later on that goes over that. But there's a particular threshold that's sensitive to the number of candidates being elected. And if a candidate is able to surpass that threshold, then they get a seat, and then all the first choice votes that went over that threshold that were needed, those get reallocated to their next choice preference. And it can also be kind of complicated in terms of how that allocation takes place. So you can like reweight all of the portions, so you can look at the portion for each vote, or you can do it randomly. There are a bunch of different ways for how that allocation takes place, for how those next choice preferences go to the next candidate. And then if no candidate has reached that threshold, then you look to the candidate with the fewest first choice votes, and that candidate is eliminated, and then those ballots are reapportioned, and then you ask again, does any particular candidate exceed that threshold? And then you keep doing that until all the seats are filled. So like already we're in like far more complexity than we were with semi-proportional methods. And even so, I would argue that the party list system. So party list system, you're just doing that reweighting whenever you get someone elected. So this one, you have like these, like in some cases, like a reweighting if you got the candidate that you wanted and getting kind of a fraction of your vote back. But there's also these vote transfers happening throughout the entire process as people are being elected in each round.
But the voter isn't doing this part.
Correct.
Right.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the voters don't get a homework assignment of like programming software to calculate SPV. So this is sequential proportional approval voting. So we spoke a little bit about kind of cognitive load, and with imagine like this list is pretty actually comparable to the list that we saw before. There are 34 names on this. There are roughly as many on the other one. And if we go back to say like the movie scenario, imagine you got 30 movies and I ask you to rank all of them in the order of your preference. And now I'm giving you another task, and I give you that same list of 30 movies, and I say like, now don't worry about ranking them. Just approve the ones that you really like, and just go through the list. You'll create your own threshold to what makes sense for you, but just go ahead and mark off the ones that you really like. That task is much easier, particularly with a long ballot list. Also, this ballot is not quite as horizontal as the other one as well. So, and this is actually really important too, because we're talking about multi-winner systems. And like I mentioned before, say like you have, and multi-winner systems work better when there are more people being elected at the same time. So say like you're electing 10 people at the same time, like you could easily have 40 or 50 candidates there. I would not want to have to fill out the single transferable vote ballot that has 40 or 50 candidates. So this one just cognitively is a lot easier for the voter. The way that sequential proportional approval voting works is reweighting. So imagine in the first round, so you're just choosing as many candidates as you like, and then in the first round, you just see who has the most votes. So it's a normal approval voting winner. You also get, which is nice because you also know that you get one candidate who is a solid approval voting winner, who tends to be a more consensus style candidate. So that's a plus right off the bat. So let's say that first candidate is someone that you got elected. And so that means that your ballot needs to be reweighted so other people have a chance to get their say. So we get that proportional outcome that we're shooting for. So if you got your first candidate elected, your ballot would now be 1/2 of its original weight, which is 1. Its original weight is just 1. And so...
Wait, sorry, so if
yeah.
I voted for the candidate that won that first round.
That's right.
Then my whole rest of my ballot is
1/2.
1/2.
That's right.
Okay, but if I, okay, all right.
Yeah. And say like we're in round 2, and...
No, okay,
uh,
I get it, yeah,
yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
So the more I win, the less my ballot counts. Yeah.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. And that's exactly it. Like you get a heavier reweighting as you elect more people, and that gives other people the opportunity to have their vote.
And is there some logic behind the 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, or that's just, it's nice and sequential and easy to think about?
There are a bunch of those. This particular one, this one is the Jefferson reweighting method. This one makes it so that this is a heavier,
But the point is, there's different ways of doing it, and there's debates and the merits and pros and cons of the different.
Yeah,
Those are
this-
coefficients.
This particular one benefits larger groups a little bit more than smaller groups, I think.
Benefits larger groups, you mean larger groups being?
Larger constituencies.
Oh, okay.
Well, let me think a little bit more on that. I'll give you a clearer answer in a moment. But there is a logic for the reweighting. Some of them benefit larger groups, some of them benefit smaller groups. Not by a ton, but just by a little bit. So it's more of a fine tuning between those. And here's that fun group quota thing. The group quota is sensitive to the number of people that you're electing at the same time. And say like there is a group out there, and they've been disenfranchised for a long time, and you want to make sure that they get some kind of representation. The first thing you would do is say, okay, well, how big is this group? And assuming that they vote in a way that's kind of cohesive or some kind of organized fashion that allows their votes to align. So say there's a group that makes up 10% of the population. What you would need to do is you would need to make sure that the number of people that you're electing at the same time hits at least that magnitude. So if they make up 10% of the population, so here, they would need about 9 seats elected at the same time, 8 or 9 seats selected at the same time. Because if it's too few, say you're trying to get some minority group some representation, and they make up, say, 10% of the population, but your district size is 5. Well, the threshold that they need to get someone elected is 15%. They're not going to be able to hit that threshold. So it's really important to make sure that when not only that you're using a good proportional method that makes sense in terms of getting like the proportional outcome when it has the opportunity to do so, that it fits your logistical issues in terms of what kind of software you have available, what kind of ballot design or complexity that you're willing to tolerate. You also have to be mindful of the size or the what's called the district magnitude of, or how many people are elected at the same time within a district. Because the more people you have elected at the same time, the lower that threshold is, which is how easy it is to get someone elected. And also, the more people you have elected at the same time, the greater proportionality that you get as well.
Now that curve applies for the various different methods?
Yeah, this curve is a pretty good estimate for all those.
So is this basically saying that having these rotating elections where every 2 years just a small part is elected is a bad idea?
Yeah, probably.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, if you want a proportional outcome, that's going to get in the way.
Wow.
Yeah, having staggered terms, yeah, it's good. It'll interfere with proportionality. Yeah, Frank?
Curmudgeon question. If hypothetically you've got a 10% anarchist saboteur element and you're electing, let's say, 15 members, I assume you've assumed that you're going to have at least 1 or 2 members that are going to be your anti-establishment crowd.
Isn't that the glory of proportional representation?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could.
Yes, I like my anarchist friends as friends. I don't like them as members of city council.
So one thing to keep in mind with particular minority groups, if they represent a minority group and they're on the council itself, and maybe they're really strange and like they don't work well with others, these anarchists, they're probably not going to pass a lot of legislation. But what this is saying is that okay, like however we got there, we've got 15% anarchists out there in our city, and they have the right to vote too. They have the right to representation with their weird ideas. They are unlikely to get anything passed, but it's important for the people who are voting to be able to have some kind of representation. Because we may look at them and say like, oh, I don't know about them, but like some of us may have ideas where other people will be like, well, I don't know about your ideas. It's not the voting method to judge. So.
I guess I would also just suggest that if you have 15% anarchists in your city that aren't represented on council, they're going to be mad. And I don't know if I want to have 15% mad anarchists. I would rather have them say, damn, we need to get more people represented, but at least, at least my vote counted.
Well, I think it's always true anyway with governmental efficiency. If everybody agrees with everybody all of the time that gets elected to council because they're elected as a block and they vote as a block, then you don't have to stay up till midnight or 1 a.m. hashing things out at the meeting. And it's very efficient, just like fascism is efficient.
And what's important too, like say a particular group, they don't have enough seats at the table, even with the proportional method, they get particular legislation passed. But what they can do is they can raise ideas that would otherwise have been ignored. And that's a really important component of proportional representation. Because otherwise groups feel shut out, like they don't have a voice. Proportional representation is a way to give people that voice. Voters are much more likely to get someone elected, and then secondly, the people that are elected represent them actually.
So going back to that curve, so is that math or is that just
That's math.
empirically based?
It's math.
Okay. All right. Just believe the math.
I literally took the equation and plotted it. So
Okay.
I was proud with how simple it looks.
Is this your math?
I didn't
come
invent
up-
the group code.
Oh, okay.
I did plot it though, yes. with some help from Excel. We just got all of this information. What are some good takeaways here? So one is that winner-take-all systems are likely inherently disproportional. So there are some good single winner methods out there, like the Center for Election Science. We're really big fans of approval voting, but we're never going to tell you that single winner approval voting is going to get you a proportional outcome. We're not going to tell you that because we don't think it's true. So single winner methods are inherently disproportional. Also, as we saw from the curve earlier of the group quota, district magnitude, that is the number of people you're electing at the same time, is really important for proportionality, as well as making sure that certain groups are able to get a seat at the table. Semi-proportional methods, they are simpler, but they're kind of sloppy too. They require a lot of coordination from both the people running and voters, and that's a lot of coordination. And so you get some outcomes that are not quite as good as a result. But they are better than single winner-take-all systems when you have that option. So not to totally push them to the side, they are better than winner-take-all systems. For proportional methods, we do pay a little bit of a complexity cost to achieve these outcomes, but this just seems to be the entry fee for proportional methods. So for instance, with single winner methods, we have some options with simpler options that perform really well, like we're big fans of the single winner version of approval voting. Really easy, gets you a nice outcome. But with proportional voting methods, some of those really easy ones tend to fall under the semi-proportional class, and they don't perform as well. So this is just kind of the cost that we have to pay. Although we don't have to necessarily pay the high cost of something like maybe single transferable, but we've got other options there. So party list systems, you can also get a lot of proportional representation there. And part of the reason why party list systems tend to do really well is because they interact with this district magnitude. So when you see party list systems, like in European countries, they're electing the whole place. They've got their entire parliament that they're electing at the same time. And we know from that other curve there, and they may use different, that curve may look a little bit different based on the reweighting scheme that they're using, but not too much. So the idea is still there. So the reason they're able to get that high proportionality is because they're electing a whole bunch of people at once, and it really lowers the threshold necessary to get someone elected to make it that.
And don't they often also have an artificial threshold? They say, Democratic Party does this for delegate selection. You have to have 15%.
Yeah.
We will allocate delegates proportionally if you get at least 15%, but if you don't, you didn't make the cut.
Yeah, that's right. There are a number of countries that will set a minimum that you need to get someone elected. So you wouldn't be able to get elected just one seat. You would need a minimum number, and in order to do that, you might need to get 5% of the overall vote. So even though technically, if they just ran that voting method calculation just normally, technically it could get people under 5%, they're kind of artificially creating a minimum cutoff and saying okay, we don't want to have too small parties, and so we're going to create this threshold that you need to be able to get past. And normally that's only the case with party list systems. With some of these other ones that we're talking about, like sequential proportional approval voting or STV, the threshold doesn't often get below that 5% mark too much to where it becomes an issue. And so STV, a lot of the burden there not only goes on the calculation component, but also with voters. And keeping in mind that when we're using a multi-winner system, our candidate lists are inherently much longer. And if we're asking people to rank those, you're going to run into a case where people just run out of mental energy and just don't rank all of them. And you take a loss there because that's less information that the voting method has to work with to produce a result. Sequential proportional approval voting. has a simpler ballot. And while the complexity is less than that of a single transferable vote, it's still kind of complicated there. You've got coefficients there that you got to keep track of for each round. You can just kind of imagine it conceptually. As you get someone elected, you have less weight on your ballot so that other people get a chance, and it achieves a proportional outcome. But like if you're trying to do it and calculate it and follow it, it is more complicated than, say, some of the semi-proportional methods. But you get that nice proportional outcome and an easy ballot for voters. So, all kinds of ways to support this. Write letters to the editor. You can lobby your league. And we have all kinds of ways to get involved with CS as well. So, thank you.
Okay.
So it seems as though, while for the voting wonks present here tonight, this is all really interesting. For someone who would say, gee, I live in a town where we have 9 at-large council members elected, we have no districts, we have no wards, we have a mayor that's elected by a council, and this needs to change. It is unsatisfactory in its representation. That it would be great if you were advocating for one method that, and you addressed its positives and negatives, but you said, gee, this is, we're going, as an organization, we're hanging our hat on this methodology, and you provided the community with the tools to do that versus, it's like going shopping for toothpaste, and it's like, wow, look at all those different toothpaste, and all I really want is a good toothpaste, right? And the choice given is so broad that it's confounding potentially. So anyway, would you,
You want me to weigh in on one?
Yeah.
Sure. Sequential proportional pool voting.
Okay. And do you think that is sellable to people that have, for the last 60, 70 years or so, just been filling out a plurality ballot?
So it's not as easy as, so at the Circle Election Science, we've gotten single winner approval voting implemented in Fargo, and right now we're replicating that in St. Louis, and doing that is not easy. And when I look at, say, like the base rates for the way that other attempts of implementing proportional methods, they have a poorer track record of implementation than single winner methods. So like
In the US.
In the US, yeah, in the US. So it's more challenging, but it's not zero. And also,
Okay.
Our current state.
yeah.
So what did New York City just choose?
Yeah, they use a single winner.
No, they just voted a new
Yeah, but
method.
it's
Single
single
winner.
winner.
Oh, but it's still single winner.
Probably instant runoff voting.
So
So
there are
what
wards.
was hair voting?
It's another
that-
word for instant runoff.
Yeah, okay. But is that single winner too?
Yeah.
All right.
So there's wards, basically. When you say single winner, that means that there's some district that you win.
That's right. Yeah.
Could,
Yeah.
could Neil, Mr. Risk Limiting Audit, make comments on any of these?
I agree with Aaron that if you can have a ballot that a voter looks at and they say, I know how to do this, I've done this before. All I have to do is check the ones that I like. They actually need not know anything more, and you can use sequential proportional approval voting, and you get very good results. And it's the one that Aaron showed at the end. You have, I mean, he showed a really big ballot, but it was way easier, as he really kept stressing, for the voter to just say essentially yes or no, but really all you have to do is check the ones you like. And given that, you actually can come up with, and first of all, you've given people, you don't spoil any ballots.
Right.
by saying you voted for too many. And that's a stupid thing for a voting system to do, to say, you expressed yourself too much, stop it. Just listen to
We're
the
throwing your
vote. Just
vote
say,
away.
I like these 8 candidates. Is it so hard for me to vote for 8 candidates when there's only 6 in the election? Just let them do it. Or 2 for 1, which is approval voting. So, and I think it's very straightforward. I think the math is really not that complicated. Most people, to do any math, rely on their friends who actually know this stuff, and anyone is going to be able to, who's really interested, can look and see how it works. So I think it's very practical and very straightforward, and I think we just need to clarify the beginning of the presentation, which is how out of touch we are with what the voters really want. I think that we've seen a lot of elections in which voters who felt disenfranchised for a long time suddenly made a big difference. We've seen swings back and forth in Boulder. We've seen swings back and forth nationally. When people aren't represented, when they don't feel heard, they get mad. I don't want mad voters out there. So I don't know. I mean, I agree that in practice we look at it and it's daunting. You know, we haven't figured out how to do this, but I think it's because we haven't had kind of the clarity to coordinate around it and to show what the issues are. And I think Fargo is one example, and I think Boulder is the kind of place that could say, let's either go back to what we did before, which was single transferable vote, which I actually think they also call the Hare system. I don't know if Hare can be applied to both multi-winner
I think
or not, but
this field is perhaps not the
dangerous.
best at nomenclature.
yeah, no, it's tough. And,
No, that's, I think, the biggest, because I think to Mark's point, so much of this is messaging. That,
Yeah.
okay, so you have a system, I can't even remember the name of it, SPAV.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
So,
and, yeah, I think so much of it is just the messaging that, well, and I liked your van, because it's pretty simple, vote for who you want. I
Most
don't remember it
votes
exactly,
wins.
but it's closer, but most votes wins, yeah.
What's your limerick? You've got a great, or a little ditty.
Mark all the candidates yea or nay. Most yays win at the end of the day.
Nice.
Approval voting.
Nice.
It's not complicated.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's remarkably similar in the sequential proportional approval voting. I know that's 4 like multi-syllable words. It's too much to expect of the American electorate. But when you get some people out in front saying, look at what we just did. This is a bad result. We need a better result. Why are people not being represented? We need to represent them. I don't know.
Well, I think it gets back to special interest groups and sort of an intrinsic self-centeredness in a polarized society about the fact that, Frank didn't want the anarchists involved.
Right.
And
My
that's what
snark-
happened in Boulder, basically, was, as I understand it, it basically ended with McCarthyism, right? I mean, that you didn't want those radicals having their little slice of even a slice of the pie.
Yeah.
Oh,
Now,
that's
my
what kills the
snarky comment when people ask who are opposed to electoral reform is, my snarky response is unpopular incumbents. But that's, don't quote me because I have to deal with too many incumbents trying to get this, advance this. And, sorry, self-promotion, Saturday, there's a symposium down in North Denver. Neil will be speaking, Celeste will be speaking, see me if you'd like details.
Aaron will be
will be speaking. I will not be speaking. So, that's your part of disapproval voting, that you can avoid me.
I think another thing that we should emphasize that I don't remember you mentioning is courts are saying there's discrimination out there. There are communities that have no representation, and it's actually a civil rights issue, or, as we know, many other kinds of issues. They should be represented, and courts are approving and or ordering that things like cumulative voting has been ordered many times. East Point, Michigan has approved single transferable vote by negotiating with the Justice Department, and a court approved that, and they just had their first proportional approval, a proportional vote. And so I think when people hear, wow, courts think that this is a remedy for a really widely viewed problem, that people will slowly wake up to that. But
Well,
it's
there's more
a hard.
towns that have it and it works well. You know, Maine, they were trying to get rid of it and the Mainers said no.
Right.
You know, I think the more and more that happens, hopefully eventually we'll get, I'm blanking on the term, but you know what I mean.
So I was gonna comment, another thing about messaging is different people have different ways of learning. So I'm one who learns more from example rather than by a theory or whatever. So if that can be a way of showing how it works, and how it does provide that proportional representation, that would be helpful to me, because I don't understand the high stuff, but I understand it.
I think it's a great point.
Yeah.
And as you know, Celeste will always comment, and the rest of the team, with, here are some ballots, let's count it up. It's a little trickier. I mean, it's hard enough with IRB, right? It's a little trickier with these methods, but
I think
we could probably do something online, or.
Yeah, I think with sequential proportional approval voting, that's something where you could actually do that in, say, like an Excel sheet or something to calculate it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think some of that, actually, it's, Linda Templin and her Fair Vote have very good graphics. And it gives enough information to satisfy people that these little pink dots move from there to there, or whatever
Mhm.
happens.
Right,
That
right.
they aren't worried about things like, the fourth and a half.
Right.
One, like,
If you did it, you could do something like that. It must be something you could do that would be, it's another step out there to do the multiple winners, but it ought to be possible.
and thinking of messaging, there is I grew up in northern Kentucky, which is right next to Cincinnati, and a decade or so back, there was a ballot initiative on whether Cincinnati should use single transferable vote. Cincinnati, in the early first half of the 1900s, had used single transferable vote. And when the folks who didn't want Cincinnati to use a proportional voting method, the first thing that they did was they went after the complexity. And even like when we see other voting methods being repealed, like I can look at an election and see some weird anomalies going on. So like it choosing a bad winner or doing some other funky stuff that really is not something that would be desirable. And but when you look at, and like those perhaps are good reasons to maybe question the voting method, but when we see a voting method really being questioned and pushed for repeal, the number one piece of rhetoric that I see is the complexity component. And like when you look at single transferable vote versus this proportional version of approval voting, like neither one I would call simple, but one is certainly simpler than the other if we're trying to kind of pick a horse in the race.
So why do we have to give it such a complicated name? Why can't we just call it approval voting?
So,
Multi-winner or multi-winner.
Multi-winner.
so there may be a couple of answers to that. Like this, we get this stuff like hot off the presses from the academic literature.
There's subtle nuances, I realize, but for
Yeah.
the average Joe, it's just like, I get to go down the list and say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no.
Or just yes.
So
Yes,
what?
yeah.
Just yes, period.
Or, right.
So what you
Blank
didn't
is
see,
no.
what you didn't see in this presentation was me going through the literature and talking to our board of advisors and looking at all the proportional versions of approval voting and comparing all their algorithms and weighing complexity, cost versus utility and proportionality. So you didn't see all that part. But there are a whole load of different methods that use an approval style expression. So there are a bunch of different ones. Like this particular one, is just one of a number.
But in
of
terms
them.
of messaging and actually getting electoral reform,
Yeah.
it sounds like what you're advocating is a form of approval voting.
We could-
And then we could,
And just
we
in a
could,
footnote.
and we could geek out about which particular
Yeah, we
form
could-
and which particular circumstance. But the basic idea is that instead of just picking a candidate, you get to go down a list and choose the ones that you like.
You have, like, if you get this on the ballot or the council says, you know what, this is a great idea, you have my permission to call it proportional approval voting. Yeah.
I've got a question of maybe organizational theory kind of issue. We're in a culture where we have limited experience, unlike the Europeans, with parliamentary systems. So they're used to the idea of voting for multiple candidates. And what troubles me is getting voters, aside from the voting methods, obviously something like the approval voting thing is appropriate if you've got multiple candidates in multiple districts. I see a real problem with just trying to get people to understand that issue. For example, in Colorado, if we suddenly decided we've got 7 representatives, we could divide the state into 2 districts and elect 3 in one, 4 in the other.
Remember that threshold thing with that curve?
Yeah, right.
Way better than one.
Or we could put
It is
it in one,
better
we could
than
put it in
one.
one district and have 7.
I do like that better. Now
That would be
talk
fine,
about
that would be
it.
fine, but my point is getting people to conceptually accept that. I mean, you know, your whole training is toward representing my geographic district. And that, you know, that's why we get so all caught up in the whole thing about gerrymandering.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are a bunch of places that do multi-winner elections. They happen to do them really poorly almost all the time, using that block version of priority voting. So the idea of having at-large elections isn't a foreign concept. People might look at it and they may not, it's like, they may be familiar, or like people move around a lot, and they could say, oh, well, the last place I was at, it was all at large, just one single member district. Like, people just do it in different ways. And
So you're saying that the voters probably we could convince, they would find that acceptable. Our problem are the ingrained vested interests who don't want to give up the current system, right?
The unpopular
Yeah.
incumbents.
Yeah, and our strategy with the Center for Election Science in terms of implementing voting methods that have good qualities that benefit voters is that we don't ask permission. We work with the people on the ground, and it's we don't ask permission of the people in charge. We ask permission of the voters, and we ask them to decide. So that's how we
Get
sort of
them
put on it.
to force.
That's right. And with voting methods, sometimes like we're identifying problems that voters didn't know were present. So,
Right.
I mean, we could, it's something that people don't normally think about. So like if someone is thinking about, well, like just kind of in general, the representation that they get with their council, and they have single member districts, you might ask them like, hey, that person, do you know who your representative is? And they may not even know that, but you might ask them, well, the person that you voted for last time, did they win? And if the answer is no, which is a sizable portion of it is likely no, then they got really nothing out of it.
Right.
They got they got a token geographic representation. When what they really want is they want someone who agrees with them on the issues. That's a lot more important for them than someone that represents the land and trees that surround them.
Right.
So do you think that, because I think geography is hard to get around. Geography is, even like the House of Representatives is every 2 years is wholesale replaced. So we could do that in an approval method, but obviously we're not going to go down a list of 500 some candidates. So you have to break it up. States are an obvious way to do that. I wouldn't want to be in California. I'd rather be in Colorado where I have 7. But even then, do you think, and you have that sufficient number so you get a nice place on the curve, so the rural voter feels like that they got a voice and weren't overwhelmed by the cities and so forth. But there's a reason that historically we've privileged the rural voters, and other countries do it too. And so I don't think we can totally escape geography. That, I mean, we have, that, so that's what I thought I sort of missed in your thing, is that you kind of poo-pooed that in that's single choice voting, and at a city level, yes, that makes sense. You know, let's not carve the city up into wards. But at a national level, especially at a nation as large and as diverse as ours, you can't avoid geography. And so it seems to me that's gonna bump into some of the issues I think that you're raising here, the cultural sort of things.
There is a little bit of a trade-off there. So you do trade off. So one thing to keep in mind is you don't have to do, if you have a large enough body, you can divide things up, so long as you don't make it too small. So a good, what David Farrell and Douglas Amy recommend as a minimum is normally seats of 5. So like districts of 5 or more. So it's only
What?
5.
Five representatives?
5 elected at once.
Okay, oh, I see.
Yeah. And so as long as you do that, you get a pretty nice, like the lower threshold there is like 16.7 repeating. So it's pretty good in terms of getting like a group elected there. And so there, I mean, you are getting some geographic representation, but like you just need a bunch of people. Like you need to get that 5 threshold, and then the legislative body that you're working on in total should be some kind of sizable amount if you're going to both be able to get the proportional representation and get some degree of geographic representation. But that's the way to do it, is to have like, say like you've got 20 seats or something like that. You can divide it into quadrants and have 5 seats each of the quadrants or something. That will give you some geographic representation, and it would also give you some proportionality. So it's kind of a compromise. But in the end, I'm thinking more about like the utility for voters, and thinking about making sure that everyone gets their fair share, and not necessarily giving some people more share just because they happen to have some more land in their backyard.
So,
It's much more complicated than that.
so HR 4000 is actually a current proposal in Congress that does pretty much exactly that. It says you need to divide states up into districts of between 3 and 5 members each. Fair Vote is behind it. I don't know if CS is or will be behind it. I don't know if you're talking with Fair Vote.
Are we talking about the fair representation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice, easy to remember number now, fair representation. And so, you know, it does exactly that. It has multi-member districts. I mean, I think the easiest place to get this implemented, because that's going to be a big lift for anybody to say, let's change how redistricting works in the midst of redistricting. But, you know, I think city councils, I think school boards, I think all the places where ward systems are really not working, you end up with people that are, you know, in their seat, an incumbent, but nobody's ever gonna dislodge until they move, or people not running at all, or not having any competition at all. I think those are the places where we want at large, but we don't want the problems with at large that you're so clear about. So I think that's where we start. And I think at the same time, we want to talk up things like HR 4000.
Like one strategy that we've taken, like with approval voting, is to show proof of concept and then replication and scaling. So I think you can do the same type of approach here. Like, okay, councils within cities, states have control over how they elect their state legislature. You can do it that way as well, and then move up to the federal level after.
Right. So I was going to thank our speaker and also